Hi everyone, Shawn Waldman with Secure Cyber Defense, and I want to thank you for joining us for our first video podcast series. And appropriately enough, I think we're going to start with cyber insurance.
Yes.
So I've got Perk Reichley here with Reichley Insurance in Beavercreek. And Perk, we're just going to have a conversation about cyber insurance and kind of pick your brain. So I guess we'll just kind of start with just kind of letting you, introduce yourself
Sure.
and maybe your background, and just we'll start right into just some general cyber insurance updates.
Perfect. Well, Shawn, thanks a lot for having me here today. It's not often we get to just talk about general ideas about insurance.
Right.
A lot of people, when you want to discuss things, are fearful of somebody trying to sell them something that they don't want.
Right.
We're notoriously known for the insurance industry that way. But at our agency, we're really bent more on education, letting the client then decide whether this is a risk they want to cover with insurance or not. So I would say my background, very simple. I'm a third generation agency owner. So grandfather started it in 1946. Father took it over in 1968 at his passing. And then I came in 1979
Wow.
and have run the agency since 1982. So I'm well preserved for my age, right? But I've seen what the value of that longevity in the industry is that the cycles are much different than they have been in the past. Things happen quicker. Insurance companies are still very, very slow and apprehensive and very conservative to react.
Right.
Employment practices liability insurance in the last 10, 15 years was sort of that same process. And cyber is a relatively new insurance risk issue. High dependency on computers today to not just enhance business, but actually to conduct business. And the methods of attack have gotten very sophisticated and are exponentially growing, it seems like, every day. So you couple those two things together, and almost every business that I know has some dependency on its automated systems, its networks, and is managing and protecting data.
Right.
And so cyber insurance is there to protect the financial losses. No different than fire insurance for the building or contents, or general liability for practitioners, or trip and fall insurance, or auto insurance for accidents. Cyber does the same thing. It brings resources to the table to help pay for the loss and the expenses that are incurred by a cyber attack.
You had said, that's a great introduction. You had said in your introduction that cyber insurance is fairly new.
Yeah.
And in the terms of years, what is new to the insurance agent or to the insurance industry?
New is maybe 7-8 years.
Okay.
So when this was first introduced, the application was 13 pages long. It was like writing a novel about an industry. You couldn't get through the application process.
Okay.
No client would sit with 2 hours and then gather a bunch of information. It was complex. And what that tells you is that the insurance industry doesn't understand the risk. They ask more questions when they don't understand the risk. They try to figure it out. Try to predict what the losses are going to be, what the lawsuit values are going to be. And when they don't know, they get very conservative and they stay out of the mix.
Okay.
Today, you've got very sophisticated companies. They're using AI to evaluate and score potential clients. Artificial intelligence. And coupled with a few tidbits of information, amount of revenues generated by the business, number of websites that they have.
Right.
And then AI really can go in and score the threat level of attacks. And many insurance companies are now getting into where they can be proactively educating some of their clients on better practices, best practices.
Okay.
Some are even requiring some of those things in order to afford better rates, better coverage options, things of that nature as well.
Well, we'll dive into a lot of that content. So I, as we were talking before the show, I speak a lot publicly. Haven't been doing so much lately, but when I can get back out there, I get a lot of insurance questions. So, this was my big opportunity to store all those insurance questions and actually get some answers. So, probably the number one question I get is, should I have cyber insurance? My response is always yes, with a big old asterisk.
Absolutely.
Right. So, what is your response to, should I have cyber insurance? And then just some basic guidelines around what somebody should be looking for.
Yeah, First of all, yes. I think that you have most of my business clients, large and small, all have some exposure for cyber. They all have some systems. There's probably an exception to what I'm going to tell you. You know, there's a business out there that relies absolutely zero on any kind of computerized systems, and you know, maybe they're a landscape contractor and they still use a cell phone and they show up with equipment and do the work, and they have an old-fashioned billing system,
right,
and collect no data. You know, do they
right.
do they have a cyber exposure? Probably not. But any business that has shown any dependency on their networks or their systems, have a cyber exposure. Anybody that use credit card transactions or online purchasing options or web-based solutions and things of that nature to conduct business has a cyber exposure on that.
So your definition of that landscaping company, that let's drill into that really quick, because that's an actually really good example. So somebody that doesn't have maybe a computer, they do their invoices by hand, but they have an email address, right? Mm-hmm. And that's all they have. They don't have a website, and they open an email to their business email that they transact on,
right?
And they get hit with a business email compromise. One of the things, you know, when I'm speaking publicly that I fight, especially when people are like, well, I just make X widget, nobody would want what I have. Or I'm Fortune 500 company, or I'm small landscape contractor and I don't have. The one thing that all of those companies have in common that you said at the very beginning is they all have bank accounts.
Yep.
So they all have finances, right? So in that particular example, that landscape company still has an exposure, and they still could experience a financial loss via a cyber attack, but it may not be ransomware on their server. It may not be. So
some of that actually drifts a little bit into what we call crime coverage.
Okay.
So the modern crime, money is not property, so it's not covered under a standard business policy. Now, crime coverage and cyber have a slight overlap in that you know, cyber thieves are using everything from social engineering to steal the login information for bank information. Then they log in as that individual customer, transfer the dollars. The bank has no liability to replace any of that stuff, and they're just out. And the money is generally unrecoverable at that point in time. So, you know, one of the things we talk to our clients about is definitely look into the tightened security, multi-factored protection on your logins. Activate that. I know it's an inconvenience. I'm sorry your staff has to do one more thing, but you have to protect that information, because a lot of the phishing scams and social, they're trying to get you to give them that information.
Sure.
If they get it and they log in, it's no different than the use of debit cards. If they steal your debit card, that's like a check. They zero out the account, and there's no liability that the bank has for that. So, you know, discontinue use of debit cards. Go to the credit cards. They have a much higher degree of security and can actually fight for some recoupment of the losses. But multi-factored authentication, these are the kind of things and steps that people can take that are like insurance. Buying crime coverage that includes social engineering coverage, things of that nature, will cover those exposures.
Is crime coverage something that I have to call out when I'm going through the policy piece, or is that something that you as an agent would help me with?
Yeah, I would definitely point these kinds of things out. Money coverage, we used to worry about theft, destruction, and of cash or cash equivalents.
Yeah.
Well, we don't do that anymore. People don't steal cash, right? They steal data.
Yeah.
And data is equivalent to cash when they can move balances of money that as quickly as data. So we focus less on the actual fire losses to the cash and cash equivalents, and more on the social engineering, fraud, funds transfer, fraud protection, things of that nature in a crime policy. We try to move towards those things. Those are more of the real threats in today's world.
Well, I learned something today.
So that landscape contractor has an email address, but he has no data that he has to protect. He's not dependent on that email address functioning to do his job or to conduct business. It's an inconvenience if somebody hacks his Facebook account and then he just has to change his password and get back on track, much with the same thing with the email systems. So it becomes more of an inconvenience issue. Do your due diligence, get good, strong passwords, be aware of the potential inconvenience threat, but it's not going to create a severe financial loss. That's what cyber coverage is there to try to protect. Okay.
What about the magic question of how much should I have? I get that all the time. Well, how much coverage do I need?
Yeah, that's a good one.
How do you calculate that? It's not easy.
Well, it isn't. It's not as hard as it used to be.
Okay.
So we look at a couple of multi-factor points. What are your revenues? I mean, what if a ransomware attack shuts your business down, and what is the loss of revenue? So we look at what's your annual revenues. That's a potential loss factor.
Okay.
We might add to that the cost of a breach and reputation defense, and hiring people like you guys to come in and do the forensics and the reparations and things of that nature.
Right.
The payment of a ransom may be the best solution than to try to circumvent the attack at that point in time. So the inclusion of those costs. We also look at the number of, what's the potential number of unique individual data streams that you're protecting. So Social Security number, dates of birth, associated with names. What are the numbers of those accounts? And it used to be how many exactly. Now it's, do you have 0 to 250,000, 250,000 to 500,000, above $1 million, above 10 million? And so we kind of know what it costs to notify and give options. Okay. And as long as you do a due diligence, you have a proactive way of protecting your data and responding correctly, the fees that are levied out there by the governments, if you would, the state governments or the federal government, they're only there really to protect against somebody that just says, I don't care about protecting the data. I don't care about notifying anybody. Those huge sums of money that are potentially leviable are there to keep people motivated to do a good job.
Okay.
Rarely do they ever get levied on those things. So being proactive about that kind of stuff is the first thing.
All right.
And we really will probably talk about, what happens if I have an attack and what are the steps I need to work.
Oh yeah, we'll talk about that. So this is a good segue. So I had recently, just in the last week, had read an article, and this is something early on when I was in my early infancies of my cyber career. I was working with insurance companies, and I was trying to help them assess risk.
Right.
Like you said, 8 years ago, they started with a very large document that had a lot of questions on it. Right? Clients were freaked out by that. Is there a trend, or are you seeing where insurance companies are going past the paper questionnaire and actually sending like an auditor in to say, well, if a client fills out the sheet and says, yes, I have a firewall, yes, I use antivirus, are we just relying on them to be truthful and actually report? Or in the case of somebody filling out one of those sheets, there is a chance that maybe just through, my IT guy talks all the time about a firewall, and they just go, we've got a firewall. Right. But at the time of a breach and they file a claim, we end up finding out that what they thought was a firewall wasn't. Right? I mean, that happens all the time. Right. So are there any trends for insurance companies to be more stringent on before we write you a policy and quote you, I need to really get a hand. Now, I honestly, no, they're not going to do that on every case. That could be very expensive.
Correct.
Who's going to pay for that audit, right? Is it going to be an insurance company person? Are they going to have a third party? Is that something that's happening, or is there a trend in that direction?
The trend is probably going in the other direction.
Really?
Yeah. So companies are now becoming very comfortable with predicting cyber claims.
Okay.
And the costs that are associated with some of those things. And as that happens, everything gets a little simpler. They need fewer data points. Now, keep in mind, cyber is a very changing, very fast-paced changing landscape. So what I'm going to tell you doesn't apply to every carrier, every company, every agent's capabilities of understanding how to address risk and explain it and things of that nature. Because even with insurance agents, trying to keep up with this is a daunting task. I mean,
Right.
I've got a homeowner question in the morning, a personal auto question in the afternoon. I've got somebody talking to me about workers' comp in another state, and I'm now supposed to be an expert on cyber coverage too, right? So it's a daunting task to keep up with all the changes in the insurance community. And so you really have to make a commitment to these things. You have to understand your markets. Typically, we only deal with a few. We choose very carefully. We understand their policies. So a couple things that we have to be concerned about when applying for coverage.
Okay.
And a couple of differentiation issues. So they all have a paper application of some sort. And a lot of the data that if they have you say, they ask a question, do I have a firewall? And you say yes. And, we'll ask the IT people of that particular company or somebody that's very familiar to answer these questions correctly. Some applications consider that a warranty statement. That's bad.
Yeah.
So a warranty statement means if you made a mistake and that wasn't true, and they issued the coverage, and then they come to find out that that wasn't what it was, and it was an honest mistake, but you made a warranty statement, then they may not have to pay that claim. So we want to avoid as much as we can anything that still has a warranty. And usually at the end of the application, there's only about 3 questions that they ask warranty. Are you aware of any situation that's looming out there that may develop into a claim? That's a very difficult question to answer
Right.
without, and
Yes,
they sometimes
no.
go, nah, not aware of it.
Right.
But if it turns out that you might have been aware of something, the purchasing insurance after something has happened the intention is we're not going to try to go back in time and cover something that you already know has occurred and then purchase the policy.
Sure.
So, we got to be very careful. We have to really understand all the questions, and you shouldn't do it alone. You should do it with somebody that understands the questions. Now, as agents, we're not allowed to fill out the applications or shouldn't fill out the applications for our clients, but we should guide them through the process and make sure that they understand the weight of the questions. Couple that with a few of the emerging companies now are starting to get completely past a lot of those things. They ask for a few tidbits of information, your annual revenues, the number of a specific individual customer account information that you're protecting.
Yeah.
And then they'll let AI that they have developed look at your URLs on your websites. They'll look at the security that's behind it. They'll give you a score of sorts. And based on that score, they will either say you're in or you're out as far as somebody that we would want to offer insurance coverage for. Now, keep in mind, my typical client isn't the Fortune 500 companies.
Sure.
But my typical client bases are probably much more likely to have a cyber attack than the Fortune 500 companies. Even though you hear about those on the news and you think that's the only people being attacked, that couldn't be further from the truth.
That's correct.
So the vast majority of businesses, small businesses, are considered easy pickings because security is less. Software is not updated and maintained many times. They don't have an ID department that's working closely with securing their systems. They're doing it themselves. And so they can be vulnerable. And so these people need a good cyber policy to protect their environment.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting. So I guess the industry is shifting more towards automated scans, and they kind of have an algorithm that they use to determine.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And I see that as a benefit for everybody involved. They're becoming very comfortable with predicting the risk and loss by looking at less data but more significant information. 2, it's going to make the process a lot simpler. If it's simpler, more people are going to go through the process and acquire the insurance.
Okay.
And keep in mind, the average policy I probably sell is around $2,000 a year. So we're not talking about
It's not real expensive at all.
a huge, for a lot of people, that's not chump change, especially for a small business. But it's not an unaffordable option either. It should be definitely part of their risk discussion. I think they have a higher chance of a cyber attack than they do of a fire in their building. And everybody buys fire insurance on their buildings and contents. Everybody buys their general liability coverage. Vehicles and cyber are the 2 things that I probably see more activity on as far as creating losses for most businesses.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay.
When the inevitable happens, right? And
Right.
something does occur, and you
Right.
need your insurance to work for you.
Right.
Certainly, a disappointing aspect of that would be, I've got a $2 million coverage, and I've experienced a heavy loss, and I've had this, cyber company come in and help, and I've got data loss. So I've got, I wrote down here, reputation and PR damage.
Right.
Right. But what are some of the reasons that a claim would be rejected? Everybody knows in insurance there are exclusions. And, like you made the comment earlier about the warranty piece, right? So whether that was intentional or not, if you, indicate that you have things that you don't, and you file a claim and it finds out that that's false, those are grounds for not fulfilling potentially all or some of that claim. What are some of, on the cyber side, have you seen any specific things of why a cyber policy would be rejected or the claim would be reduced?
Not many. The claim results from an incident. Most of the incidences that occur have some form of coverage attached to them. So the important thing really is to train our clients. You've got cyber coverage. You have to be aware of your daily activities. So a phishing scam, there's an issue that happens on one of the workstations and it looks like there's a virus that's been launched. What do I do? Right?
Right.
I mean, you have to get people past this stigma that, well, I don't want people to know about this. I'll self-contain it. I'll shut it off, turn it back on, and what doesn't seem to be a problem anymore, but it may have implanted malware. Who knows? We have to get people very quick to respond to these things. And sometimes, and you know best, it's a very insignificant event that will launch a very significant loss at some point in time, either immediately or sometime in the future.
Right.
And so training employees to watch for phishing, in my agency, that is the one thing. I actually have a company that helps me do some of my managing of some of my online affairs and some of our things that will repeatedly, constantly is doing phishing testing with my staff. So they're sending examples of things, and he's getting very creative, almost too creative, trying to get my people to bite on something that is not dangerous, but is a training thing.
Sure.
And what I found is the fact that my employees, and whether I am or not, if my employees know or think that I'm testing them for that, and there's some potential consequences to opening some of that stuff up, they're watching that stuff. So it's about training and preparation. But back to the issue. If you've had an incident, a ransomware attack, some kind of a shutdown of your network, some sort of a release of a virus or a malware, they have to be prepared to notify their insurance carrier, because they will want to bring some resources to the table immediately. So I'm sure that people like you have to go in and do the forensics. What happened? How big was it? What did they take? I mean, I'm sure you have to, and I'm not a computer guy, so this is where I lose a lot of definitions and specifics, but I imagine you look at the event logs, you have to track what's actually occurred, and I think computers keep track of pretty much everything that happens. You just have to know where to look and find those kinds of things.
Yeah, we're actually going to do a podcast later in the next 30 days or so. We find that a lot of companies aren't prepared for the forensics. So there's been many cases that we've been brought in to do an investigation to answer the who, what, when, where, why, and how, and we find out that the logs that we need haven't been saved. We find out that logging, for whatever reason, was never turned on. So we're going to try and produce some of that information soon to try and educate companies before this happens. These are the things specifically that you need to be doing to make sure that if we do have to come in, or a forensic company does have to come in, that they're able to answer those questions.
So immediately responding with a notification. They want that incident reported. I know people are worried about, if I turn in a claim, will my insurance get more expensive, or will they cancel my insurance, or whatever. But getting clients to get over that stigma, they're there for that. And the quicker that they can get and intervene, sometimes the better the outcome is for everybody involved on these things.
Okay.
And then protecting your systems, just being very proactive in that area, and being able to monitor that in some form or fashion. Or if you don't have time to do it and you don't know what you're doing, then get somebody that can do that. Even if you're a small business, if you depend on that system for your business activities, somebody should be monitoring its health and its security.
Sure, I agree.
Yeah.
How does ransomware coverage work? Are there specific coverages for ransomware and for business email compromise? And I mean, is it line items like that, or is
there are, in a cyber policy, you have lots of line items with limits that are usually $1 million limits in many, many areas. And a ransomware attack will activate many of those lines of coverage. So a ransomware attack hits, the systems are shut down, there's a notification of a ransom that needs to be paid, and usually within a certain time frame, right? So things get locked down. There's an immediate call to the insurance carrier. They, in turn, will either have somebody like you on standby or will reach out to somebody like you. They'll go in, they'll do a forensic examination of what's actually going on. What type is it? Is it something? So ransomware has a couple of unique things, and this is where some coverage issues may come into play. So most ransoms these days are wanting to be paid in crypto.
Right.
Okay.
Point.
So, and not every one of my clients may reside past and present clients that might have had information out of my systems that may have been divulged. So a ransom attack usually has some sort of an intervention in the systems. They've stolen some data, and the last thing they do is they leave a ransom behind to extract any last revenues that they possibly can from this attack. So there's a breach of information that has to be identified and expected. So that's going to activate all of your monitoring and your counting and your notifications. And keep in mind, every state has slightly different regulatory issues.
Right.
In Ohio, we have some sort of an immunity against lawsuits, civil lawsuits against the release of information. I just have to pay for the monitoring. But California doesn't have those kinds of laws, and other states don't have the same types of immunities. So depending on where my clients reside, I may have activated notification in multiple states. And depending on those states, they may consider cryptocurrency an illegal currency, right?
Sure.
So the insurance company may not be able to pay directly those cryptocurrency ransoms. If the decision is to pay the ransom, the client may have to take dollars, convert it to crypto, pay the ransom, and then get reimbursed in US dollars from the insurance company.
Okay.
There are ways around it, but it's just there are some unusual circumstances that can crop up depending on how the policies are derived and what they state. Usually they state their claims are paid in US dollars, but not every company does business in just Ohio or just the United States. They may have clients all over the world in some cases.
Okay.
So currency issues need to be looked at and discussed. You want a very broad definition. You want a company that can pay in euros or in yen or in crypto, if you can find those companies to do that. And they're out there to do that. And that's the quality of the coverage you're purchasing.
Okay.
The more business you do around the world, the better the policy needs to be more responsive in that. Otherwise, you're having to fund those things only to then expect some remuneration as a refund on the back end.
Okay. Before we get too much further, we're sitting at about a half hour into the segment. I wanted to quickly address some of what we get when we're out talking with people and they're telling us that they have cyber insurance. I don't think they actually do. So I get a lot of, if I specifically ask, especially if it's a potential customer that's calling us for help.
Correct.
One of the first things I'll say is, do you have cyber insurance? And they'll say yes, or they'll say, well, I don't think we have a specific policy, but under our general policy, there's a cyber clause or something. Right. Have they really bought a cyber policy, or is this just some type of miscellaneous thing that's hanging off the side of this thing? And what value is that going to be?
So most insurance companies that are out there know that there's a cyber exposure for most businesses. And rather than addressing it with a true cyber policy, which truthfully, you really need to go to the specialty markets for cyber coverage to get the proper policy for most larger business exposures. But the average business out there, the average retail shop that has a credit card machine and stores no customer data and has a point of sale retail machine that if it got attacked or hit, I've got the nuisance of having to reset my software, go through my licensing, updating all my equipment, updating all my stuff. A lot of insurance companies are now offering or automatically including some form of a low-level cyber coverage.
Okay.
So is it cyber coverage? Yeah. Is it adequate? No.
Okay.
It makes you feel good. It makes you feel like you've got something. And something is better than nothing.
Sure.
Okay. But if I have a $350,000 loss for a breach and I've got $50,000 worth of coverage, is it really insurance? And it's very difficult for clients to assess their own risk and threat levels in this environment. You're too close and too uninformed about the strategies and the infrastructure of automated systems. Most business people I know are good at their craft and depend on systems, but they've depended on other people to assemble these systems. Very few times do you have a business owner that's savvy in tech-related issues and can truly understand their exposures and take proper steps to adjust for those things. So having an outside insurance agent or company like yourself that can go in and do threat detection and some form of scoring and an assessment, and then helping them to understand those issues and risks, and then a policy can be easily purchased to cover those exposures.
Do you encourage clients to maybe talk with their attorney before they purchase a policy, or how does the legal field work into this at all?
Attorneys tell insurance jokes and insurance agents tell attorneys jokes, right?
Okay.
I don't mean that bad, but I
Sure.
mean, we're the same. We all read the same document, which is a document designed to be interpreted in a courtroom. So they look for language just like we do that triggers coverage.
I got it.
Attorneys that I find, unless they're specialists in cyber, they are more uninformed than the average insurance agent about some of these things.
Okay.
And they're not prepared to do any threat assessment as well. Now, if there were a lawsuit and we needed to hire an attorney to defend a cyber attack or defend a litigation or a civil suit, most of the time you're not going to have any civil suits regarding cyber. It's blatantly just attack, cost, report, repair.
Okay.
It doesn't have anything to do with litigatable issues at this particular juncture. I mean, if I had my information was released and was found on the dark web, purchased by somebody, and then weaponized against me to buy a $1 million mobile home in my name in Seattle, Washington, and left me with the debt, how do I prove where the data came from?
Right.
I mean, I can't.
True. Right.
So, so litigation, attorneys have very little play in the cyber world. It's mostly just paying for the expenses of cyber-related costs and attacks and breaches and things of that nature.
Okay. One of the things that we get a lot, especially when we're doing responses, is, and one of the questions that I've received when I'm talking is credit monitoring automatically included on cyber policies, or is that something that's going to be asked? Will you need credit monitoring if something would? How does that work?
There's a process. I'm usually not involved in that for my clients, but identification of the records that were taken, the breach is evaluated, notification processes go out. A lot of times reputation defense is associated closely with how the wording in those notifications go out, and then credit monitoring is offered. If it's accepted, it's paid for by the policy. They don't just turn it on because I may be already monitoring my stuff. I don't need multiple people doing the same things. That gets confusing. And I have to sign up for it anyway. I mean, you may pay for it, but I physically have to go in and authenticate the stuff on my side of the world. And it's going to notify me. It's not going to notify my person that I used to do business where they still do business with. They're going to notify me if there's any information. So monitoring is just the enhanced version of your information's been divulged and you need to help protect yourself. We'll pay for the process to help you do that.
Okay.
So it's included, but it's many times it's offered. I mean, between the IRS and Anthem and a few others that I can tell you, my information's out there. And the monitoring system that I use has already notified me that the presence of my email address is already on the dark web out there, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
It's telling me things, but what am I supposed to do about that, right? So
right.
Strong passwords, back to multi-factored authentication. If they get access to my data, can they do anything with it?
Yeah.
Can I easily shut it down, turn it off, quarantine some of these things?
One of the companies that we use that monitors our clients as well is obviously, as time goes on and there's more breaches, is detecting that, a lot of our email addresses and data is in the dark web. I don't think that's any real big surprise, right? Nobody gets shocked by that. And certainly, things like multi-factor and, good password hygiene. One of the most important things is also not using the same password for the same website.
Correct.
So, not that anybody watching, is doing that, but it happens all the time,
sure.
right? So that's one of the main reasons why something like, 8 years ago, LinkedIn was compromised.
Right.
And somebody would say, what in the world would a hacker want with a bunch of LinkedIn? Why would you hack? It's publicly there.
Right.
Because they want the passwords.
Right.
They want your password to LinkedIn because that password is very likely and that username being used somewhere else.
Exactly.
So that's really I think in our experience, that's the best defense is multi-factor, good password hygiene, change it often, and probably the number one I'm mentioning it fourth is to use a different password on each site. Mm-hmm. That turns into most clients completely vapor lock when you say that because they can't even comprehend that. Right. How would I even? Well, then I have to write down more. No, please don't write down your username and passwords. Right?
Sticky on the workspace.
It's password management systems.
Right.
It's things like LastPass and Dashlane and the one for the Mac, the whatever it is.
Yeah.
And anything that you can get a hold of that allows you to store those credentials in a secure manner and access them.
And I think this is all part of that same conversation, right? So, over the last 50 years, the buildings we build, the electronics we buy, they're all safer. They don't cause fires. We don't heat with solid fuel anymore. I mean, everything we do. So over time, we have fewer events, fewer fires, fewer things of that nature. So cost of property insurance and things of that nature from weather-related events seems to be the only vulnerable thing that we can't really predict, but we build safer things. So part of the conversation of you always need to buy coverage because you can't stop all of this stuff. On your best day, you can't stop it all. But the things that we are doing in addition to purchasing insurance are all the things you're talking about. Raising our level of awareness, training our employees, creating systems to where we can actually function more efficiently in an environment where we have very unique passwords for many different sites that we use. And every business that I'm in, I can't tell you, we probably use 12 or 13 different systems. Every one of my staff members has to be password protected on all of those systems. That becomes a daunting task. And I can hear the groans when I say, I will assign you your password when the 90 days is up. I'm like, I don't want that.
Right.
OG, capital ZYB, 35, and then a couple of weird characters, right? Because I can't remember that.
Sure.
I want to put in, Breezy Sweet 3 or something, which is probably just as secure, but you can't use that on everything, right? So we're learning how to be a harder target. we're learning how to be a little stiffer on the wall building around the office to make it higher and thicker and a little bit more difficult to scale. And a lot of times they'll go to a softer target. I mean, thieves look for the ability to monetize their opportunities, but they aren't going to risk detection and discovery, trying to clean a harder target out. So they look for vulnerability. They look for creativity on that.
Well, we'll talk just a little bit. We'll kind of start wrapping things up a little bit.
Sure.
So strictly from a statistical standpoint, one of the things that we look at, and I don't know if you've ever heard of it, is the Verizon Data Breach Investigative Report, or the DBIR. Mm-hmm. The DBIR is, if you're a business owner, or you're just curious, is a very good document that gives that intelligence of who is the target. The target, well, the most general target is a small business. Mm-hmm. There's the whole piece about vendor management, right? So it's going to be a lot easier for a hacker to go through a small company that's connected to a big company.
Correct.
Because the fortress isn't as big with the smaller company.
Right.
So that is statistically proven. It's also statistically proven that 98% of the attacks have been occurring over email. Mm-hmm. So email is something that we need to be very cognizant of. I think one of the biggest mistakes that companies make nowadays is allowing their employees to access web-based email inside the corporate confines.
Right.
I don't think companies really understand that completely bypasses whatever security you have in place. Right. So there's that. So, and then the last thing that I wanted to comment on was, you've mentioned it several times, is the whole employee awareness and phishing. Cybersecurity is hard. So don't take this the wrong way, right? It's difficult. But there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that's never attacked. So we've talked about some of those basic things. Good password hygiene. Patching your systems. We still find that a lot of organizations think they're patching, but they are not.
No, right.
So they set up whatever widget it is to patch, and then nobody ever checks on it. And then before you know it, you find out that your machines have an extremely low score.
Right.
So just some of those basic things. I was reading just today about Maersk, which is one of the largest shipping container companies in the world.
Right.
They ship 20% of what is moved around the world is shipped by sea.
Right.
And they experienced a massive ransomware attack about a year or two ago, maybe longer. And it was interesting to read that, because you're a large company, right? Very large organization. The larger you get, the more dispersed things get, and the harder it is to control.
That's right.
Right. And just in their report alone, I found things like enable MFA. These were their recommendations. Right. Make sure you're enabling MFA. Right. There weren't a lot of very extremely complicated, rocket scientist things. They've lost touch with the basics. They got to be very large, and they had a large IT company or a large IT presence. So bigger they are, the harder they fall, right?
Well, and a lot of it still comes down to the human component, right? Automated systems, I can put a firewall in place and score very well. I can lock things down, secure things. But if my people release a virus behind the firewall, by opening an email that has a suspicious URL to it and didn't pay attention, and then didn't notify anybody because of fear of retribution, or I'll just hope it goes away, or it didn't do anything, because it's not necessary. It's not sending off red lights and bells and whistles, right? These things happen inside a controlled lock system, but it's very invisible. So when those happen, that's the human component. I can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars locking things down, but if my people aren't properly trained, take it seriously, and have some ownership for the security of the environment that is protecting their jobs, it doesn't really get any further than. And that's why the attacks are going after that particular low-hanging fruit. I'm only as good as the weakest employee in my ranks.
Right.
And many times, and we actually will compare in the office, and I'm a very small office, so I can yell out of my office and talk to everybody. Did anybody get the email from, I got it too.
Yeah.
It's bad.
Right.
Get rid of that. Don't open that.
Right.
So they're not just hitting me; they're hitting everybody on my email site. They're trying to get somebody to not pay attention and open that thing up or something that looks good about that stuff. And they're getting fairly sophisticated and creative about that stuff.
No, they definitely are. I mean, it's definitely a cat and mouse game.
It is.
We're in constant escalation, right? So you make a move, another move is made, and it's continuous. So
I liken it to the Cincinnati Millicron company down that used to make the radar detectors, right? Same company made the police units that would detect their stuff, and they also made the detectors on both sides. So they made money irregardless, and if they improved one, then they would improve the other one eventually.
Yeah.
So it's a closed system of some sort. So the more you do, the more opportunity you give, and the more challenge it is.
Right.
But truthfully, hacking used to be a thing done by people to brag for bragging rights. Now,
definitely financially motivated.
It is very financially motivated to the point that I can actually buy a ransomware as a service.
Correct.
So I don't even have to be that sophisticated. I can buy the technology to conduct ransomware attacks against whomever I want,
right,
and buy it as a service out of a box.
Yeah.
So all I have to do is be motivated to do it. I don't even have to be a hacker or a sophisticated hacker. I can buy the software to do that. So I can completely go into business as a rogue, making and monetizing my efforts on the network and have some sophisticated protection against being captured or held accountable for those types of things.
Right. All right. Well, I mean, we're pretty much at about 45 minutes, so okay. I think we've probably beat this all the way down.
The horse is almost dead.
I think so. So, Perk, Reichley, I really appreciate it. Reichley Insurance in Beavercreek. We're going to put your contact information at the bottom of the screen here, so people, if they have questions, obviously have an opportunity to contact you. I'm sure you perform things like assessments for current insurance policies, and to check and see if there's any gaps.
Absolutely.
So I know we went through that process as a company, and I highly recommend that that you engage. It never hurts to engage a second pair of eyes.
Correct.
It doesn't necessarily mean you have to leave that company, but certainly having somebody else take a look at things for you would be very beneficial.
And we're open. Anybody that really wants to call and talk to us, they don't feel any threat or pressure of any sales efforts. We're, as I've often told people, I'm a better educator than I am a salesperson.
Sure.
So I love answering questions, helping people understand their risks. Smart people will know what to do about that stuff and whether to engage us or to keep with what they've got. But like you said, it's always good to get a second opinion. There are many different ways to accomplish this task, and there's many different policies, and there's no two policies that are exactly alike. Those differences need to be identified and make sure that they fit your culture, your business.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining me. I really appreciate it. This has been our first video podcast series. The next series, we're going to talk about how to prepare for a breach or a security incident. So we'll be going through some steps. We'll grab one of our forensic engineers and bring them in here and start to talk through to just continue this evolution discussion of, we've talked about the insurance and that piece. So now on the next episode, we'll talk about how to actually prepare for it. So.
All right. Thanks, Shawn, for having me today.
No problem. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.